Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another episode of the Greenskin Q&A, and we are nearing the end. We are entering the first of the last 4 subjects, so without further ado, we don't have any Shadow and the Blade stuff to show off today, so let's go ahead and head right into our Greenskin questions. First up is from something I can't pronounce at all. You'll see it down in the description. They ask, "Hi, I'm going to call you AP because those I think are the only letters I recognize." Asks, "Hi, is it possible for an orc to become some kind of mercenary and maybe work for something like the Empire, at least for a short period of time, to search for a good fight perhaps? Also heard about some crazy orcs which can attack trees or rocks if there's no one to fight with. Is that real? Thanks for your attention, good content also." First of all, thank you. Second, so addressing the easy part of the question, is it possible for Greenskins to fight inanimate objects? Yes, that can happen and has happened. Grimgor Ironhide is actually pretty notorious for getting very, very angry if he does not fight at least once a day, like a big fight, and he'll start just like destroying random things along his route or wherever he's hanging out, and then he'll start attacking his allies. Like, he'll kill all the goblins because he finds them to be really annoying, because Grimgor hates goblins. And just a bunch of stuff just builds up really out of control. But there are orcs that, if they go long enough without anything to fight, they'll just start attacking anything and everything around them that sticks out of the ground. It's unusual, but it does happen. Particularly with orcs that are a little more driven than others. As for the mercenary question, so a lot of people asked about this, and that's going to be kind of the main focus of today's video. But the long story short is that the problem with Greenskins as mercenaries is that Greenskins are only motivated by violence. So you can't, with very rare exceptions, you cannot bribe a Greenskin to, like, not fight you or to join up with you and to fight somebody else. That's not gonna work. Greenskins are gonna fight everybody without any... They don't care. They're just gonna fight. Like, when Azivir... A good example is that when Azivir Kul invaded the old world, he was the 12th ever chosen, so the one before Archaon. Azivir Kul was totally fine with the Greenskins joining up with him. He just wanted to destroy the Empire. That's all he cared about, was ruining the nations of men. So he was totally fine with the orcs and goblins joining up with his horde. And some did. Some had the distant... They were interested in winning. And they had the foresight to realize that they could either get wiped aside by this huge horde of chaos, or they could join up and follow along and smash up other stuff. So some joined him, but most didn't. Most Greenskins just outright attacked him, even if it was completely fruitless, or maybe they would only attack his vanguard or the rear formation, or they would just launch themselves at him. And the more damage his army did, and the further they pushed through Troll Country into Kislev, the more Greenskins they attracted. And even the Greenskins that joined did not join under his banner. It's more of they just kind of followed along at a further distance and would run in to join the fighting and just start attacking anybody that got too close to them. So that is like the best case scenario to get an orc as a mercenary. Traditionally though, you cannot hire a Greenskin. They're not reliable. They're going to attack you the instant you turn your back if they're goblins. And if they're orcs, then they're never really going to accept in the first place. Nothing you could offer them would be worth it for them not to just crump your face right then. Especially if you have an army behind you, or you have a city to burn, or they view you as being some kind of threat. The only way you would be able to possibly negotiate with Greenskins is A, you'd have to be able to talk to them, which is a pretty big hump to get over. B, you would have to be a very careful balance between being strong enough that the orcs would not just ignore you or kill you just because you're annoying them or wasting their time, but weak enough that the orcs would not view fighting you as some kind of awesome challenge. So you would have to be strong enough to not bore them, while weak enough to not entertain them. And if you accomplish that, and you knew of a fight, or a force that they could fight that was close by that you could lead them to, then you could negotiate with them and get them to go to wherever it is you want them to go fight. But that would be, it's very difficult to pull that off. And there are people who have pulled it off. But it's very, very rare. Most people who motivate Greenskins to fight for them do not hire the Greenskins as mercenaries. What they do, like dwarves do this frequently. What dwarves will do is they will attack a Greenskin horde. So they'll like attack the Outriders or the Wolf Riders, and they'll basically make enough of a fuss to get the orcs or the Greenskins' attention. And then they will lead them through like a pass, or they'll just lead them on this big old merry chase that will usually wind up dumping the Greenskins on some kind of undead army or beastmen or warriors of chaos. Like, they will lead the orcs into another enemy, and the orcs will just barrel into them. Especially because if you do that tactic, that works really well, because the longer you kind of tease the Greenskins with a fight without giving it to them, and you just build up their anger and make them more and more and more and more frustrated, until finally they just barely can contain themselves, and you get to the point where you can just, you know, lead whoever you lead them into, they're gonna attack with like all the excitement in the universe. But that's really the only reliable way to use them as mercenaries. Anything more complicated than that, it's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. Our next question is from Kasun Rathnatunga. I think I got that. Asks, can humans magically modify snotlings as workers and cannon fodder? Could humans magically modify snotlings? No. It would take a pretty incredible level of power to attempt to modify any kind of greenskin. The Chaos Dwarves were able to pull it off, but it took a absurd amount of time, resources, and power to do it, and a lot of really unethical stuff. And it could be done, but the problem with snotlings is that, the problem with all greenskins is that if you take away their attributes that make them dumb or disorganized or reckless, if you take that away, the problem is that there's not a way to make greenskins obedient. You can take away a greenskin's lack of focus through these means if you were to recreate the Black Orc experiment, but all you would do are create snotlings that are not idiots and are like hyper focused on just unleashing violence or building machines capable of unleashing violence, and that's all they would do. Like, they would be a huge nuisance. And if they got out into the wider greenskin world, not only would they continue to propagate, but their adaptions would likely spread. So like other snotlings would be able to pick up whatever they're doing. And it would be really bad. So you would never even want to try that. That being said, snotlings as workers? No, absolutely not. Cannon fodder? Yeah, that could be done. If you caught enough snotlings and made them scared of you enough that they would do what you told them to, or else get like beaten or killed or whatever, theoretically you could use snotlings as something along the lines of cannon fodder, except for they're way too small to be. Snotlings are only like maybe this biggish. They would not. They're not very good as frontline troops. That's why when snotlings gather in enough of a group to be threatening, they're known as a swarm. Like, they're categorized in Warhammer Fantasy, they're categorized along normal-sized bats, scarabs, large scarabs, and then like jungle creatures like snakes, venomous snakes, and lizards and stuff. They're not very big, so they're not. That's not a job they'd be super great for. All right, Happy Bot, another question, Loremaster. How does a mercenary orc live and interact with a human tilean settlement, and will mercenary orcs and dwarves cooperate? So they don't, to both of those. First of all, mercenary orcs did exist in old Warhammer Fantasy. Like, the last time we saw them was late 6th edition, in the Dogs of War supplement, where we had a lot of super bizarre units lore-wise. They were basically units that could not exist in the lore, except for Games Workshop wanted them because they were funny, or somebody made them and they thought the models looked really cool, or they wanted an exception to the rule, and so they created like this weird gap in the lore, and we're like, okay, this is how this unit exists, but it's like a super specific instance, and it's an exception, not the rule. And then after 6th edition, Games Workshop decided to go a lot more serious with Warhammer and just took that whole thing and crumpled it up and threw it away. And that included mercenary orcs, so they don't exist anymore. Because if you played the Dogs of War back in the day, then you could literally buy mercenary orcs and mercenary dwarves, ogres, giants as like units. Like, you would just take a unit of mercenary orcs and it was fine. You can't do that anymore in Warhammer Fantasy. That doesn't work. Just because having orcs near an army is like having a room full of flammable gas next to a very aggressive match. Like, something's gonna happen. The only race who has pulled off having greenskins and orcs in the same room, and they're not being just incredible violence in like a second, are the Dark Elves. And that's because the Dark Elves take both of them and anybody as slaves, and the Dark Elves just beat their spirit. They just break them. The Dark Elves only allow them near one another once their spirits are like so shattered that the orcs and the dwarves just don't even care about each other anymore. Of course, the end times, there was a lot of exceptions, but that was the end times. Next up, we have Johannes Hjortshøj? Yikes. Hopefully I got that. How open... okay, so so he asked about Greenskins mercenaries, which we already answered. But then he asked that orcs have this inborn notion they are incapable of dying. How much do they believe it? So, orcs are crammed full of bravado and are total bullies. So they genuinely believe that they are too tough to bring down. Most orcs will gladly waltz into absurdly violent situations just to get a good scrap in, and it takes a very terrifying display of power or might or deadliness to get greenskins to consider that their mortality is a lot more relevant than they thought it was. So, like, if you charge into a battle against orcs and you're taking a few of them down with your handguns, and they charge in, you cut a few down with your halberds, you're sticking with spears or whatever, they're not going to care, because they just think of the guy next to them that got killed. They're like, oh, I'm way dead harder than he is, and they're just going to charge in the fight, and they don't give a crap, because they do think they're invincible, and they will keep fighting until they're dead. However, if you kill the biggest, baddest orc among them, you kill their boss, then all of a sudden they go, oh crap, he just killed the boss. He just killed the dead artist of our lot. So me and the lads we're gonna peace out. Like, we're gonna run away and find another day. That's kind of how they operate. It's almost comical in a sense that, yeah, orcs especially are very, very prone to not being impressed by displays of like martial skill. The only thing that will get an orc to pause is if you just unleash wanton destruction upon them by either killing the biggest one or by just killing a whole crapload of them in a very short amount of time. But there's very, very few orcs who would ever not want to fight something, at least until they start dropping. So hopefully that answers that. Eleni Karamichi... Oh my gosh. Karamichalidau. Sorry, question. Already answered it. Zach B. saying, as do greenskins ever cooperate with humans at all? Like, would they be mercenaries or something? No. No, they would not. Not willingly. The only way a Greenskin would cooperate with a human, outside of, like, the end times, would be that the human would have to go through a lot of shenanigans to manipulate the Greenskins. Exceptions would be, like the advisor in Total War Warhammer. If you played the first game, there's a whole, and you can look it up on YouTube if you only own the second game. There's like a whole cutscene of the advisor meeting Grimgor Ironhide and like dealing with the Greenskins. That's fairly accurate. Like if there was someone who took all of the proper preparations to deal with the Greenskins and made themselves appear valuable enough that the Greenskins were willing to put up with them, they would be willing to cooperate with a human. But it takes like some really careful designs, and that dude's a Tzeentchian sorcerer. So if there's anyone that knows how to manipulate people, it's him. We got another question from Zach saying here. Let's go ahead and knock it out. Was the sleeper from Orc Slayer the only one of its kind, or are there several of them in the Earth's crust just waiting for the dwarves to delve too greedily and too deep? So, for anyone not aware, in Orc Slayer there is a monster called the Sleeper, which is this big, freakish ant queen-like creature that has the ability to telepathically take over the minds of Greenskins and operate them like drones in an anthill, you know, like individual ants, and just order them around. And it makes Greenskins much scarier than they are normally, because it basically gets rid of all their downsides. But supposedly the Sleeper was the very, very last of its kind. It was the Sleeper was a final horrid nightmare of an empire that had existed beforehand, that in its last moments, as its empire crumbled around it and the rest of its species was wiped out, it individually bargained its body and soul to the dark gods in hopes of rising again millennia later to reclaim its fallen empire. Obviously, that didn't work out because of Gotrek and Felix, but from the evidence suggested in the book, I do not believe there are any more sleepers. That being said, there are tons of things in the deep earth for dwarves who delve too greedily and fall too deep. There are plenty of Balrogs down there. They're not Balrogs, obviously, but there are nasty, nasty creatures hiding in the depths of the Warhammer world. Next up, we've got Gawker, who asks, are there any situations where Greenskins have been manipulated into attacking another group by a certain person/faction? Yes, that happens frequently, actually. Greenskins have been manipulated by, they've been manipulated by vampires a lot. Manfred von Karstein almost specializes in manipulating Greenskins. He did it in the end times. He did it, one of the most famous times that happened was called the Battle in the Border Princes, which is actually when Heinrich Himmler and Manfred von Karstein teamed up, and the two of them massacred an army of high elves and dwarves that had teamed up to act as a guardian force for the Everchild, which is Tyrion and the Everqueen's daughter, Aliathra. She had two huge armies defending her, and Himmler and Manfred could not have taken it down alone. So what they did was they through a bunch of machinations, they got a big wall of Greenskins going and basically guided the Greenskins into that army. So the Greenskins slammed into the dwarves and the high elves, and it was like a huge, ugly battle, which then gave Heinrich Himmler and Manfred a bunch of corpses that they could immediately resurrect to use as their frontliners. Which ended up not going well at all for the high elves and dwarves. They lost that battle. The vampire counts won by a landslide because of the orcs. But, so that happened. And there's been numerous other times too. Dark elves in particular, dark elves have had a very successful history with, they will essentially capture Greenskins and use them as slaves. And then if there's one particular slave that they find promising, like a really big orc or a particularly clever goblin, they will do what they can to basically fix them up and make them really strong and just release them on the world to just cause havoc. So there have been orcs and goblins who have been captured by the Dark Elves and then released in strategic places to basically start building up an army that slams into something the Dark Elves don't like the Dwarven Empire or high elf colonial settlements back in those days, or, you know, like a certain problematic place in the Empire or Bretonia and stuff like that. That has happened. So orcs get manipulated all the time, but to the orcs, they don't care as long as they get to fight. As long as they get a good fight, they don't give a crap. Most of the time. Some do, but most of them don't. Next up is Bruva Michael, who asks, have Greenskins ever been manipulated for good intentions? Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about, we already talked about dwarves using Greenskins to deal with like really nasty beastmen warherds that are getting too close to certain dwarf holds and stuff. But probably one of the most dramatic instances of the two most dramatic instances I can think where the Greenskins were the good guys was, so there was a kingdom in the southern Badlands called Morcane, also known as the Strigoi Empire, which is where the Strigoi, the vampire bloodline, was at their absolute height. It was originally built by the really famous shaman Kaden, or Kadon, however you want to call him. But when he put on the crown of Nagash, it inspired him to build Morcane and that empire. And he, which Morcane was the capital. And, but you can also refer to it as that, and people generally know what you're talking about. And he ended up being supplanted and assassinated by Ushoran, who is the first of the Strigoi. He's the father of that bloodline. And Strigoi and Ushoran built up this huge empire where there was a bunch of Strigoi. It was the first vampiric empire to be made out of nothing. So the first true vampiric empire was Lamia, which was, of course, ruled over by Neferata, and but all the vampires were present. And then after the whole Nagash incident and the war against the Tomb Kings and all that crazy shit, they got chased out and the vampires all scattered. And eventually, when Nagash's crown was found, the crown of sorcery, Ushoran killed Kaden and put it on his own head, which didn't go well for Ushoran, but because his mind kind of warred with Nagash for control and it was messy. But he built up Morcane as this massive empire, and it was unstoppable, and it was going to be really bad because it was basically a society where vampires ruled openly, very openly, and everyone below them was defended, but they were kind of treated like resources. And they were building up, but Neferata Neferata doesn't like them. Ushoran and Wazoran, who are the heads, Wazoran headed the Strigoi line, and Wazoran headed the Necrarch line. They and Neferata, who's of course the head of the Lamian line, they hate each other. Wazoran and Ushoran would put up with each other pretty well, and Abarash lived there for a really long time, but and like was willing to work with them. But Neferata never wanted to work with them, and pretty much from the instant she found out about it, Neferata's whole like Hail Mary scheme was to find a way to kill them off and get their empire destroyed. And so what ended up happening is that Neferata didn't directly cause it, but Neferata had a huge hand in the food of a situation that led to basically the Strigoi had successfully, or the dwarves a long time ago had successfully pushed most of the Greenskins out of the world. Like they had pushed them far east of the World's Edge Mountains. And the Strigoi were managing to maintain that for a little bit, but then something happened and the Greenskins came back in a mass. Like we're talking about one of the biggest invasions of Greenskins ever. It was just this huge Savage Orc army. Like there were other Greenskins in it, but it was headlined by Savage Orcs. And they just came smashing through everything. And the Strigoi's empire and the city of Morcane just got wiped off the face of the map. Like they just got utterly obliterated by this Greenskin army. And Ushoran himself, at least from what we know, died fighting on the walls of the city. But it was like a huge battle. But that empire would have been really bad for the rest of the world if it had been allowed to continue. So the Greenskins did a solid one on that. And then another time the Greenskins were kind of the good guys was during the War of the Black Plague. So basically when the Skaven unleashed the Black Plague on the men of the Empire, and I think it was either 8 out of every 10 or 6 out of every 10, but it was like a ton of people died. Like most of the Empire's population got wiped out by the disease and the ensuing conflict. And the Skaven basically swarmed out to take over, and there were 2 things that stood in the Skaven's way. The Skaven would have easily taken over the entire Empire, if not for A, kind of their own hubris, but B, the Forest Goblins. The Forest Goblins of the Drakewald Forest were not interested in having the Skaven on the overworld. And although they certainly were not helpful for the nations of men either, because they kind of took back a lot of their own space, which we talked about in a prior video when we discussed Forest Goblins, the Forest Goblins were having none of that Skaven nonsense, and they actually led a huge campaign that made it really difficult for the Skaven to hold a meaningful grasp over the southwestern empire. Like the southern empire had the Forest Goblins played a pivotal role in defending it. Of course, further off to the east in Sylvania, you had Van Hal, the legendary necromancer, fighting against the Skaven, and then you had the Wood Elves of Laurelorn Forest also fighting against them. So the Empire of Men were not as alone as they felt during that war. But those are the major times there. So the Greenskins, just kind of through being sheer jerks to everybody, have accidentally probably saved the world a couple of times. But never intentionally. Next up is Pim van Irvin, who asks, how common are Greenskin invasions in the Border Princes, and how do they deal with those invasions? So full-on invasions of the Border Princes are not terribly common, as Greenskins have to build up a really good amount of steam to reach that far north, because they have to pass through what's called Blood River Valley, which is this big old valley. It's this big space between the dwarf capital of Karazakarak and then the dwarf naval capital of Barakvar. So those 2 holds have this road, and to get to the Border Princes, you have to cross this road unless you're going to take a boat, which Greenskins are not terribly great when it comes to navies. There are Greenskin navies, but they're very rare. So for them to get past that point, it usually has to be a pretty large... It either has to be a small enough Greenskin force that they can slip beneath the notice of the dwarves, in which case they're not really going to threaten the Border Princes that bad, or it's going to be such a massive army that the dwarves are going to try and fight it, or lock away, or hide in their holds and let it pass by them. In which case, if it's that big, it's probably just going to keep barreling north to go to take Blackfire Pass from the Beastmen and then push upwards into the Empire, because those are really good raiding lands. The thing about the Border Princes is that the Border Princes don't really have anything the Greenskins would want, and the Border Princes are literally these massive stone-walled settlements that were built by the Bretonnians long-ass time ago, centuries ago. And they were literally built as isolated fortifications that are just super sturdy and designed to hold out against armies much bigger than them. And if there was like a notable Greenskin invasion, all of the Border Princes would not all of them, but most of them would set aside their petty squabbles for a bit to send reinforcements to deal with the Greenskin invasion. And the thing about the Border Princes is they're a bunch of assholes, but they have money and they can throw it around, because they control a lot of land and a lot of important trade routes. And when they have money to throw around, they're also bordered with Talea, which is the mercenary capital of the world, and they know it. They hire out the dwarves, either of the Black Mountains, the World's Edge Mountains, or the Vaults. They hire out dwarves, they hire mercenaries from Tilia, they hire ogres, and they send them to just go kick the crap out of the Greenskins, which works 10 times out of 10. So thanks to the fact that all the big WAs go through Blackfire Pass so they can fight the Empire, or they go fight the dwarves instead, because the Border Princes just don't have anything that valuable. Anything else that actually attacks the Border Princes, they can handle. But that being said, every once in a while, either a WA will start up in the Border Princes, in which case they'll wipe out a couple of those keeps on their way to wherever they're going, or you know, some particularly nasty, clever group of Greenskins might get one over on them. If you read, if memory serves, if you read the Skarsnik novel, it actually details one of the Border Prince keeps or cities getting wiped out by a Greenskin attack sent by Skarsnik. So basically, the long story short is that you just make yourself very hard to invade and hope for the best. Because in the Border Princes, life is hard, and that's all there is to it. All right, and then today's last question is from Knight4154. There we go. Who asks, have the Greenskins ever allied with the side of Order, and if so, how long did it last? They have allied with the forces of Order, but not intentionally. Usually it's because there's such a big army of bad guys that the forces of Order are on this side of it, and the Greenskins are way over on the other side of it, and they're both attacking the same guys, and that's how that works. And the Greenskins have never willingly or intentionally allied themselves to the forces of Order. And if they have fought alongside them for a battle, that was it. It was for a single fight. And it's more of an accident when it happens. The only time I know of where the Greenskins willingly teamed up with the good guys was during the end times. And that was only because of Grimgor Ironhide. And the only reason that even worked was because Grimgor fought Malekith. And this is after Grimgor is the incarnate of Beast. So Grimgor's basically a god. And Malekith is the incarnate of Shadow. So he's also basically a god. And the two of them have this big fight where Malekith is getting the crap kicked out of him. And he even has his dragon, Seraphon, but the two of them are just getting the tar beaten out of him by Grimgor. And Malekith Malekith has a very rare moment where he basically puts aside his pride and he realizes that fighting Grimgor is a huge waste of time. Because even, like, in his head, he's like, okay, if I go all out, I can probably kill this dude. Which, debatable. But he's like, you know, okay, if I do that, then Archaon's gonna blow up the world. So what he does instead is he basically... Malekith is clever enough and has imprisoned enough orcs that he understands how to talk to them. And Malekith basically just baits Grimgor's pride and says something along the lines of like, oh, I give up. Like, you punch my dragon in the face. You're clearly super terrifyingly strong. I don't want to fight you anymore. I surrender. And, like, I'm not going to fight back. Like, if you try and fight me and my troops, we're just going to let you kill us. Which Grimgor does not consider very fun. And then Malekith's like, you know, I came here because I was going to fight Archaon, who is saying he's the strongest in the world, and he's literally going to kill everyone. And Grimgor's like, oh, he said he's the strongest? I'm going to kick his ass. Because Grimgor doesn't give a shit about the world being blown up. Grimgor only cares that somebody's bragging that they're bigger and dead harder than he is. So, at that point, Grimgor tells the rest of his Wa not to attack the elves, because the elves are now part of his Wa. So when you read it's actually one of my favorite, it's a very funny moment in the end times and really well written in my opinion. And that when they fight Archaon at the end, like, technically, when it comes to like who all is listening, Sigmar is in charge and the one giving orders, or Karl Franz, even though it's actually Sigmar, but Grimgor is like, from the way everybody talks, Grimgor is in charge. Like, Grimgor considers all of the incarnates as part of his Wa, and, like, he's the boss. Like, he considers Nagash, Sigmar, Alariel, the dwarves, like, he considers all of them part of his Wa, and, like, that's just the way it is. And that's why when they go down there, the first person that fights Archaon is actually Grimgor, because Grimgor was the war boss and he called dibs, and like Sigmar was like, all right, like, whatever, have at it, because they didn't want to risk Grimgor not willing to work with them. So they basically were all Grimgor's lackeys during that portion of the end times, which was fun, and of course led up to a super epic fight between Grimgor and Archaon. But yeah, we're actually a good bit over time, but that's all right. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you have a great day. More Shadow and the Blade stuff to come in the near future. Not super near, but like near future. And more Q&A stuff to come tomorrow. So thank you all for watching. Catch you next time. Bye.